All right, Jessica Berlin is a commentator based in Germany who talks often on foreign policy, and not long ago just returned from Kiev, and she's also a visiting fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Dana.
So look, just off the top, Russia is progressing. Russia is taking more land. Russia, despite so many commentators saying that Russia is being pushed back, the Ukrainians are fighting hard and they are resisting and they are holding ground, Russia appears to be creeping forward, and the allied NATO response, Europe response just doesn't seem to be enough. What is your assessment?
Well, that's absolutely right. Unfortunately, Russia has the upper hand when it comes to artillery, full stop. It doesn't matter how hard and how bravely the Ukrainians fight. All that you said is true. They are fighting hard. They are getting ground back. But the fact of the matter is, the Russian military is a steamroller. They have a huge hardware advantage. And it doesn't matter how many brilliant tacticians and brave fighters the Ukrainians have. At the end of the day, if their positions are being bombed into the Stone Age, at a certain point, Russia will gain that ground. And that's what we've been seeing in the Donbass in the past weeks. I'm in contact also with folks in the Ukrainian army and the Foreign Legion, and it's a grim picture. And we really need, from the Western Alliance, to see more hardware support, more artillery. We need to deliver them the tanks and the guns they are asking for, because otherwise, slowly but surely, Russia will be able to bomb their way forward.
You're saying that it's a grim picture. Is it painted as a grim picture in Germany? And is there kind of, a majority opinion there that says this is in our interest, in Germany's interest, to stop Putin and for Ukraine to win this?
Right. Well, there are two sides to that question. So firstly, no, the public here does not have as much of a feeling of urgency and awareness of how grim it is, how dire the situation is. That's not unique to Germany, though. I think that's the case across the entire Western world. Part of it is, of course, journalistic standards and producers deciding what images to show and not to show from the battlefield. So this distance from the war and from the brutal, bloody reality of what's happening to people right now is kept at an arm's length. I think that...
What do you mean by that? I mean, that's a curious
I'm
comment.
talking about graphic
Are you suggesting that editors are trying to not show pictures from the battle? I mean, the fact is, a lot of news organizations don't want to lose reporters, and they're not putting them all the way forward in the East.
That's true. And this is something that's true in any combat situation. How far forward do you let your reporters go? But there is a lot of content, video, imagery coming from the soldiers themselves. Everyone's got a camera in their phone these days. Mm-hmm. Some soldiers are even going into battle with GoPros. So there's footage. I'm not saying the news should be filled with gore and gruesome images that will terrify people and children who happen to be flipping through the channels. However, I do think there is space for a more clear depiction of the stakes of the horror without crossing the boundaries of public decency and protecting young viewers. And that's something that can be said in any humanitarian crisis and war situation. I think in the case of Ukraine, this is also urgently needed because, quite frankly, when you speak to people on the street, there's just not a sense that this is happening. This is critical, and this is happening in Europe. For a lot of people, this conflict feels very far away. To the second part of your question around a majority opinion in Germany that this is the right course, I'll disagree with you there. No, there is not a majority in support of what Olaf Scholz is doing and this course of inaction. There are no exact numbers.
Okay, let me jump in there, because you're saying a course of inaction. So we kind of need to deal with that. So, I mean, I think that there was a belief that the German public supported Germany's intervention along with other NATO allies in Ukraine, according to polling. Was there not?
So what do you mean by intervention?
that it was in Germany's interest to secure the European continent from an expansion of Putin, which included painful steps in cutting off Nord Stream 2, for instance.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The German public is in favor of more action.
Right.
The German government has delivered less action than is desired and needed to help Ukraine win.
Okay, let's, if you can help me understand what they're delivering, because every day I read that they're going to send tanks. Every day I read that they're going to send, anti-aircraft platforms, or they're going to send artillery now, or rocket artillery, or radar for.
Right.
And then there's somebody else the next day saying Olaf Scholz never delivers, and now they're delaying again.
Well, here's
and
the
they're not
operative
delivering.
word.
So is there a game being
go,
played there, or why is it so confusing?
Yeah, what you just said, deliver, that's the operative word. Imagine you've got a pizza delivery company and they call and tell you, we're bringing you pizza, we're bringing you breadsticks, we're bringing you soda, but it never shows up. Well, what does that mean for you? It's very nice that the pizza company has made daily announcements for the past week that you're going to get a pizza. But at some point, after the second, third time they say this, and there's still no pizza on your table, you start to question whether or not they do indeed count as a delivery company of pizza. All right. And this is exactly the problem that we're having with the German government. They are making announcements left and right of what they're going to send. But we are almost 4 months into this war, and no heavy artillery, no heavy weaponry has arrived in Ukraine from Germany. Full stop. So they haven't done nothing.
None?
No heavy weapons. Despite all the
deal. What's going on?
Well, exactly. And this is precisely why there is such an uproar across the NATO alliance, and especially coming from Ukraine and large sections of the German public, that this is simply morally reprehensible and also deeply confusing politically as well. The communications coming out of the Chancellery have been quite simply a shambles. It started very strong in the first days of the war when Scholz came out and delivered his Zeitenwende speech. This was, it truly felt like a new German foreign policy coming forward. And I was highly supportive. I was willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt. Also knew that they would need some time to find their feet. But I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I was cautiously optimistic that we would see them step up and do the right thing. However, in the 3 months since, what we've seen is promise after promise go undelivered.
So why? Is it intentional? Is it just political? It's a political ballet there?
We can only theorize, of course. Scholz has kept his advisory circle very tight. Even within the coalition, the Greens and the FDP are in disagreement with his course. So that's a delicate, tight wire as well. But basically, within the Chancellery, they are sticking to themselves. They're making their decisions and holding their course. And at this point, I would put forward that it almost doesn't matter what they say. It only matters what they do, because they have told so many stories in the last 3 months. Circular logic, saying things are impossible, then coming out a week later and saying, oh, never mind, we can do that. At the end of the day, though, where are the weapons? Where is the money? If it's not being delivered from Germany to Ukraine so that they can use it now, then it's meaningless. The statements are meaningless. And there's a lot of theorizing going on as to why this is. First and foremost, and most obviously, the fact is that the SPD, the Social Democratic Party of Chancellor Scholz, they have decades of history and close ties with Russia, already going back to the Soviet Union during the era of Ostpolitik, during the Cold War, and certainly in the last 20 years during Putin's reign, of closer ties in business, especially at energy levels. Everyone knows Gerhard Schröder left the German Chancellery and went right into the executive boards of Russian state-owned energy companies. Also,
Steinmeier only left those companies under threat of sanction. And
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he towed it pretty close to the line. I mean, I think he was
Yeah.
going to make even the US sanction list.
He is a disgraced former chancellor. This is Nixon level scandal in Germany right now. He's also been disowned essentially by his own party. Even his entire staff resigned in protest to his
Really?
refusal to apologize and resign from the boards of these energy companies. So it's really been bad, personally for Schröder, but also for the entire SPD. They've lost credibility on the topic of Russia. And Scholz has made the situation go from bad to worse. If he has good intentions, this is best case scenario, right? If he has good intentions, then at the very least, he is utterly failing to implement a strategy to achieve the good intentions he has for Ukraine. However, on the other end of the spectrum, and what is looking increasingly likely, because Olaf Scholz sees many things, but he's not stupid. If Olaf Scholz wanted Ukraine to be equipped with German weapons and funds to win the war against Russia, then they would have it. All right? He's not stupid. And the German government, as slow and bureaucratic as it is, would indeed have been capable in the last 3 months of delivering those weapons.
Why in an interview did you call Olaf Scholz Putin's useful idiot?
You're familiar with the phrase useful idiot? I didn't invent it. It goes back to the Soviet Union, right? Okay. Yeah, I've got.
You're welcome to explain it. It goes back to the.
Potentially, because
Is it
I've
a
got
KGB term?
a lot. People think of, you called Scholz an idiot. I said, no, I called him a useful idiot, and that's a set term.
Was that a KGB term?
Yeah, for folks who were basically helping advance Soviet propaganda and Soviet interests without realizing it. You know, people who drank the Kool-Aid, who believed something that was actually Soviet propaganda or a Soviet double bluff, and were advancing the interests of the Kremlin without realizing or intending it. Useful idiots abound it. Yeah.
And then you've called President Putin a 21st century Hitler. Very strong words to use, and probably especially in Germany.
And I don't take it lightly. This is
How do you justify it?
This is genocide. This is firstly an unprovoked attack from a major power on a much smaller, weaker neighbor, based on false flag accusations of protecting the ethnic Russian minority in Eastern Ukraine. This is precisely the same sort of logic and faux justification that the Nazis used in Poland in 1939, and also to justify the annexation of the Sudetenland earlier in 1939, before the war had started. So firstly, there's this historical parallel. And secondly, I don't need to go into the details of the brutality, of the sheer wanton slaughter of civilians. Cities bombed to the ground, tens of thousands of people dead, torture, murder, rape of women and men, children to old people. It is systematic destruction and the attempt to destroy the people and the nation of Ukraine in whole or in part, which is a paraphrased definition of genocide according to the UN Convention on Genocide. So when I call Vladimir Putin a 21st century Hitler, that's what I mean. I'm not copy pasting and saying this is precisely the same as World War II. That's not the analogy. But in terms of this intention of the horror, the systematic use of the entire power structure of the Russian state to destroy Ukraine, that's what we're talking about. And if we let this go on,
I have to say,
the Chamberlains of the 21st century.
I have to say, I'm shocked at still some of the numbers. Like, you know, they've just come out recently with the numbers of dead, they think, in Mariupol. In addition to 500,000 people displaced, maybe 600,000, but at least 20,000 dead. I mean, you have to take a minute to process that, right? And that's just Mariupol.
Just the ones they can find. So many casualties, so many murdered people will not be counted because their bodies have been destroyed or buried in mass graves that haven't been found yet. This is the tip of the iceberg. It is slaughter. And I don't say that to shock or horrify. This is the horrifying reality that we face. And if there's one thing people need to take away from this, it's that this is happening right now in Europe, in the heart of Europe. Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. And, I just got back from Kyiv last week. And it's really striking how, walking around Berlin, catching up with folks, for so many people, the conflict feels so far away. Like it's just another headline disaster on another continent. But this is right here. You can drive to Kyiv in 13, 14 hours. That's closer than from Berlin than Rome. Not to mention anywhere in Spain or Portugal. It's only a little bit further away than Paris. This is our neighbor. This is right here at home. And we need to really internalize this in the public so that people understand we need to tell our governments and make our governments take more action. We do not have time to wait and see what happens in August or something like this when some of the weapons deliveries are being projected. We need to move at the speed of war. They need this stuff right now.
Even this week, Germany said that they were going to commit a brigade to Lithuania, just as the Russian Duma member is talking about a possible motion to withdraw Russia's recognition of Lithuania as an independent country in the Baltics. Then Germany has come out and clarified in the most muddy way possible that, well, they're not going to station a brigade there. The brigade may be of German soldiers may be based in Germany, and then they may, I don't know, rotate through Lithuania like some of the other battle groups. I mean, again, it's mud.
Welcome to the German government's communication strategy. It's disastrous. And
all right. Well, you just said, again, you've just said strategy. You didn't say bad communications. You said strategies. So, I mean, they're just talking out of both sides of their mouths, and I guess it's working for them.
Yeah. Like I said, I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt at the beginning of this conflict.
No.
I was willing to write off some of those mistakes as incompetence and being overwhelmed and trying to find their feet. But after 3 months of this is no longer just incompetence. This is systematic. So if they can always point to a statement saying, oh, we said we committed this, we committed that, but then they don't deliver, at the end of the day, this war will be decided by the things that are done and not the things that are said.
Yeah, really good
and
point.
Germany's role in history will go down as having either done something or nothing, and doing nothing directly supports and aids Vladimir Putin. So you draw your conclusions.
Tell me, what do you think of the fact that France, Germany, Italy, they may be in Kyiv this week, in fact. Mm-hmm. Do you think that they're coming around to the US position that they cannot impose any kind of ceasefire on Ukraine? Ukraine is the one that will decide what land they're going to give to Russia, if they're going to give any, and that this has to be probably not negotiated at a table right now, but worked out in terms of Ukraine needs to win? Or do you think that France, Germany, and Italy are now pressuring Ukraine to bring about some kind of ceasefire and to stop the fighting, even if it costs them eastern Ukraine?
Right, that's the $1 million question, and we're about to find out when they get there. I am not optimistic that they've come around to the American line and have decided to go over there as a trio to announce they've changed their mind and seen the error of their ways and are going to give Ukraine everything they need. I certainly hope they do. I'd love to be wrong, but that's not the vibe I've been getting from Paris, Rome, or Berlin. I think they're going together in part to show strength in numbers and behind the scenes to try to get the Ukrainians to see that some concessions will need to be made. I think that they want to see a swift end to the fighting rather than victory for Ukraine at all costs. And that's highly dangerous because any concession to Russia means that this behavior ended in a net win for Russia. Any concession will allow him to say, this worked. And if Italy, France, and Germany have any sense of historical responsibility, as well as long-term geopolitical strategy left in them, then they have to see that Russia needs to be stopped now before this can spread, because this will have a domino effect for dictators all across the world. Certainly not last and not least China. They are watching this, and their entire Taiwan policy and approach will be based on what they see the West do or not do in the face of this unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. So I am hopeful that that the Germans, the French, and the Italians can be pushed and prodded by our allies in Eastern Europe and the Baltics, as well as in the US and UK, to stand up more. Also, there were statements out of the president's office in Ukraine basically saying that they will not accept any attempt to influence them toward concessions or a ceasefire. And they kind of sort of gave that parting opening shot to the delegation that if they try to influence Zelensky and his team to back down, that will get leaked, that will be publicized, and they will be named and shamed.
Yeah, well, that
So
paves the road for these meetings where Zelensky is
Yeah.
saying, "Don't come and
Yeah.
try to, you know, put me in an arm lock on this. We're not going to surrender any land."
He
But you know,
doesn't
it
need
is
their
really
advice.
odd,
He
right?
needs ammo.
Sorry?
He doesn't need their advice. He needs ammo.
It's really odd to me that, probably less so than to some people, but the fact that this is really being led by the Baltics to some degree, Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia and Poland have been so strong and so supportive. I mean, the US has, and Canada has, and others, but that core NATO group in Europe is not looking very muscular. And it's almost like you have an alliance outside of NATO that is carrying kind of the bulk of this support for Ukraine on their shoulders rather than the core NATO group.
I don't find it terribly surprising, actually, and I'll tell you why. Who would understand better how Russia ticks? A bunch of Western Europeans, or the people who, over the course of the last 500 plus years, have somehow lived under Russian and Soviet occupation, dictatorship, and oppression? Okay, from Finland down to Ukraine and everywhere in between, these people, these nations, have been colonized, brutalized, and or annexed by the Russian Empire, by the Soviet Union in some way or another for hundreds of years. They know the Russians a million times better than we in Western Europe, not to mention North America, ever could. And this has been also one of the huge imbalances in just the NATO brain trust, that the attention and the influence go heavily to the richer nations in Western Europe, who are also coming from this great power history and mentality. You know, our neighbors in Eastern Europe and in the Baltics, their opinions, their warning flags went unlistened to in 2008, in 2014, onward and onward. They've been calling this right for decades, and we weren't listening in the West. Why? Because there's this assumption deeply rooted, I would even put forward, in our colonial histories, where there are two types of countries in this world: conquerors or conquered. And your Great Britons, your Frances, your Germanys, your Italys and Spains, we share a common history with Russia of being great powers who conquered other peoples and nations. And there's this carryover, this post-colonial hangover into our thinking, where when we look at China, when we look at Russia, we see a fellow great power that still needs to be dealt with as an equal, whose word is somehow more important, relevant, and powerful than the words of the people who have been traditionally conquered. And the fact that so many analysts and politicians and journalists, not to mention everyday folks across Western Europe, struggle to imagine a world in which Russia is ostracized, in which Russia is put on its knees, is just unthinkable, because they're Russia. They're huge, they're important, and we have to give them the respect they deserve, no matter what the cost, no matter what they do to someone smaller. And that's a subconscious assumption in our geopolitics and also in our institutions, look at the UN Security Council, that has crept into, unfortunately, the moral clarity that we would need in this moment to say, it doesn't matter how large you are, Russia, you are not too big to fail. And we are not bailing you out of this. You done fucked up, and now you need to suffer the consequences. And that's a banal way of putting, I think, a simple moral and geopolitical reality that Russia needs to fail now. And we need to make them fail. And if we don't, then we will be co-responsible for the deaths of further tens of thousands, if not millions, and the death of a free and sovereign Ukraine if we don't stand up and help them now.
Yeah, Jessica Berlin, great to talk to you. I had heard you speak before, and I'm so glad I reached out to you. I mean, I'm really appreciate your thoughts, and I think your reflections are dead on the money. I think you're terrific, and I really do appreciate talking to you. And I hope a lot of people will listen. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Dana. I appreciate that.